So you were told Lady Deathstrike is the next card to break the meta. It's so simple, right? All you need to do is play Wong, then Mystique, then Shuri, then Lady Deathstrike, then Lady Deathstrike kills everything in that lane, then you Arnim Zola, and then you do it again in the other lanes. That's an easy 6-card combo that you'll be able to pull off once every... 1 second, let me just do the math here. Never. Now, obviously, that's a bit of a stretch because clearly I just showed you the gameplay of the combo. However, do keep in mind that it took me about 3 days to get that clip. So yeah, basically never. Lady Deathstrike, or as I like to call her, Lady Deathstrike, because you'll become deaf after listening to her animation on full blast volume a couple of times. Lady Deathstrike is a 5 energy card with 3 power that reads, on reveal, destroy each card here with less power than this. Today we're going to examine some of the decks that we could play Lady Deathstrike in, as well as some of her uses within the meta. Now, if we're going just purely off of effect, Lady Deathstrike fits really well into a destroy deck. And that's the first deck that we're going to look at. Now, I figured Lady Deathstrike is good at killing cards, obviously, because that is literally the effect. But she's not only good at destroying your opponent's cards, she's actually pretty good at destroying your own cards. And this is why I wanted to focus on a strategy that had death in it. I figured Lady Deathstrike is actually pretty good at reducing death's cost to 0. Now, the other thing that Lady Deathstrike can do is obviously destroy your opponent's cards, and this is why we have cards like Forge and Shuri in the deck. Forge actually essentially doubles Lady Deathstrike's attack, and so does Shuri. But because we're running cards like Forge and Shuri, we're deciding to add a Nimrod, and then we have the typical destroy package in Carnage, Venom, and Deathlock. Those are going to be helping destroy our Nimrods and also helping get that count up for Death and Knull. Obviously, because Lady Deathstrike is great at killing our own cards, we're going to be running cards like Bucky Barnes. Not only is Bucky Barnes going to be being destroyed by Carnage, it's also going to be being destroyed by Lady Deathstrike. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to have Lady Deathstrike work in this deck as. It's going to act as counters to our opponent's cards like Iron Man and any other ongoing effects that are a bit annoying and under 3 attack. But also, in times where we don't need her to destroy our opponent's cards, sometimes she will be destroying our own cards and adding value, such as with cards like Bucky Barnes. Now, a quick Google search will reveal to you that one of Lady Deathstrike's goals is to actually kill Wolverine. Not only is that fit in the deck thematically, but I think it's also kind of cool that Lady Deathstrike is in the same deck that Wolverine is in, and she can actually kill Wolverine. At least the first time, because he's only got 2 power. The most important part about your Marvel Snap deck is naming your deck. And I'm going to change this name from Death to something more original. I'm going to call it Deathstrike. We are set to jump into our first game, and I'm eager to try out Lady Deathstrike. We open a pretty decent hand and our sweet new anime Wolverine. Titan is revealed, which is great for my deck since I run a Knull. My opponent drops a Sunspot and passes. Turn 2, a Luke's Bar is revealed, which is an issue since all my cards are, underage, and they'll get bounced. I drop a Wolverine, and turn 3, I follow it up with Deathlock. Turn 4, I could play a Shuri, but I typically like to see a Deathstrike or a Nimrod before I commit to Shuri. So instead, I just go for the Bucky and Carnage combo, which will put 10 power on the board and boost Wolverine by an additional 2 power. My opponent plays Jubilee and hits Vision. Now on turn 5, I managed to hit my Deathstrike, but unfortunately the only card she'll be able to destroy is Daredevil, which is actually quite terrible, so instead I just play the Knull in mid. On my final turn, I know for sure I lost Luke's Bar, so the only way I could win here is if my opponent only commits to 1 lane and tries to win that. I'm only up by 1 power on mid, so I guess that my opponent will be trying to contest there, so I opt to drop Death there and hope that it's enough. And my opponent plays Leader in the right lane. What? Why? All they needed to do was play Leader in mid, and they'd actually just be up by 1, and then the Death would counter itself. Anyway, I'll take the win, but I can't help but feel that my opponent just punted this match, and we didn't actually deserve to win. On top of that, Lady Deathstrike was almost unplayable. However, you can't judge a card off of 1 game, and we'll have to play a few more to see how she is. And that's exactly what we did. We played a few more games, and we lost. We lost. Oh, and did I mention we lost? And we lost. Remember how I said you can't judge a card just based off of 1 game? Yeah, well, I take that back. Lady Deathstrike f***ing sucks. I'm kidding. But she does suck in this deck. Now, after many games, here are the things that I learned about this deck. If I'm going to commit to Lady Deathstrike destroying my opponent's board, then I have to lean into that part of her effect hard, and only playing cards like Shuri and Forge are not going to cut it. Having a 2-card combo to only destroy cards with less than 6 power just seems bad. In fact, it's better to just play a Shang-Chi and instead destroy anything 9+. No, seriously, if you're playing Lady Deathstrike over Shang-Chi in your destroy deck, What the are you doing? Go put in Shang-Chi right now. Also, anytime we did play cards like Shuri or Forge, I almost always would rather follow that up with a Nimrod since it adds more value overall. I still think Lady Deathstrike has a chance to work in Destroy. I do think I was actually just approaching the deck wrong. So instead of focusing on destroying my opponent's cards, I think I'm just going to lean hard into the strategy of destroying my own cards, in doing so reducing the cost of my death to 0. So the first cards I'm definitely going to cut are Forge. I just feel like Forge felt a little bit clunky. Same with Shuri. Now, since I'm cutting Forge and Shuri, I'm also going to be cutting Nimrod. Now, my goal here is on turn 6 to maybe play a free death and a Knull. Hopefully I destroy enough of my own cards. The other thing that I could do is I could put in a Moon Girl. Moon Girl will be great because if I could play Moon Girl with my death, then I'll be getting 2 free deaths on turn 6. I'm also not a big fan of Deathlock, so I'm going to cut him. I'm not playing Nimrod, so I don't really need the Deathlock anymore. I'm going to go ahead and put in Killmonger again. I'm also going to add Squirrel Girl. I think Squirrel Girl is going to help reduce death's cost by a lot. And finally, since we are playing Moon Girl, I think I'm also going to be adding a She-Hulk into the deck. That way that if we copy our hand and we do sometimes have to pass turn 5, that's fine. Hopefully we'll be able to drop a double She-Hulk and a death. So I think this deck might work a little better with Deathstrike, so let's go ahead and test it out. It's a different deck, so we're going to have to give it a different name. Let's call it Deathstrike 2.0. Game 1 was off to a banger with Super Flow revealed, which allowed me to play Wolverine on turn 1. My opponent played a duck and an ant, so it must be some sort of zoo deck. Turn 2, we play Bucky into the same lane and hope that we start destroying mid to get our deck rolling. And my opponent plays Jean Grey. Hell. But wait, Isle of Silence comes in with the clutch save, and our plan to destroy mid is back on the menu. Unfortunately, turn 3 was a pass, but we had a Lady Deathstrike to play on 4, and that's exactly what I did. She dropped down and cleaned up the lane. Not only did it reduce my death by 4, but it got rid of a potential 6 power on my opponent's side, in addition to cracking my Bucky and boosting Wolverine by 2. Now that is a solid Deathstrike. Turn 5, my opponent plays an Iron Man. Are you kidding me? Now, ideally, Deathstrike would have been good to save for turn 5, but also I had no idea what deck my opponent was playing, and the Iron Man just seemed kind of random. Also, on turn 6, we have a Death and a She-Hulk to play to try and win the other lanes, and that's exactly what I did. My opponent plays a Spectrum, so now that tells me that they were playing an ongoing deck, but luckily my Death and She-Hulk were good enough to hold their own lanes, and just like that, we finally got a win and managed to even use Lady Deathstrike in the process. Now, I was excited to use Lady Deathstrike in a win, and the next game was even better. My opponent was playing a Patriot deck, and this is exactly the type of deck Deathstrike feasts against. Also, so does Enchantress and Super Skrull. And their 4 energy. My opponent played a Patriot followed by a Mystique, and my Deathstrike leapt in there and tore them apart. Except for that rock. That thing was just too strong even for her. Anyway, an easy win when we followed that up with Death, and already this deck is feeling much better. So I've gone ahead and played like 20 or so games, and I definitely like this deck a lot better than the previous Destroy deck. Now, it doesn't win like every single game, but it does definitely win more often than the last one. And Lady Deathstrike is actually not that bad in this deck, but she's also not that good. Games that we just saw, obviously she was pretty good. However, in the next games I played, she was kind of just very middling. There weren't many games where I really wanted to drop her from what I'm using her for to destroy my cards. I feel like you can almost get away by playing something like a Deathlock. Now, I also don't own cards like X23, so obviously that might change once I do get X23, but right now I feel like instead of Lady Deathstrike, I can honestly just take my own advice and add a Shang-Chi or even a Deathlock. But I do like Moon Girl duplicating my Death and my She-Hulk. That actually does end up giving me quite a lot of power on turn 6. Now, I feel like we've exhausted testing Destroy decks with Lady Deathstrike. I wouldn't say she is fantastic in Destroy decks. So instead, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and pivot to a Mr. Negative deck and see if we can fully utilize Lady Deathstrike's effect. So this is the Mr. Negative deck that we're going to be putting our Lady Deathstrike in. Essentially, what you want to do here is reduce Mr. Negative's cost with Zabu. You want to play Mr. Negative on turn 3. Turn 4, Mr. Negative is just as fine. You then want to play cards like Magic to extend the game to turn 7. And then essentially on turn 7, you're going to be dumping all your free cards. We're going to want to play a Wong. We're then going to want a Shuri. And then we're going to want a Lady Deathstrike. Now that is bare minimum. We can then follow that up with obviously an Arnim Zola. But the God Hand is basically a Wong into a Mystique, into a Shuri, into a Lady Deathstrike, and then into an Arnim Zola. We obviously have other cards that will help us win the game, like Iron Man and a Knull. What do you know? Those cards are pretty good when they're free. And we're also playing a Jane Foster. Now, Jane Foster is a card you definitely don't need to play, but I want to go big with this deck, so we're going to go ahead and put it in, and hopefully that'll help us get our combo quicker. So I'm hoping Lady Deathstrike reaches her full potential in this deck, and let's go ahead and play some games. But first, the deck name. Mine is Death. We open up with Zabu, which you always love to see, and then on turn 3 I managed to draw Mr. Negative, so obviously I play it that turn. Turn 4 I extend the game with magic. On turn 6 I decide to do a Shuri Deathstrike combo for 10 power, and already this feels a lot better suited for her effect. She manages to wipe the lane, and on turn 7 we follow it up with Knull, Iron Man, and Mystique, and that is more than enough to win the game. If we didn't execute a full combo, a 10 power Deathstrike feels really good, so I can already imagine how good it will feel when she is more than 10 power. And of course, this next game was one of my craziest. Zabu on turn 2 is just so good, and what do you know, we rip a negative on 3 yet again. Now, field space is the biggest issue with a negative deck, and obviously the revealed locations are not favorable for us, but luckily the Sanctuary gets ruined, and that allows us to play Wong in mid. On turn 5, I contemplate what to play. I was going to play Shuri, but I figured if I play Jane Foster, she will draw us Iron Man, Knull, and most importantly Zola, which will allow me to play Shuri Deathstrike Zola on 6 along with Iron Man and Knull. When you're piloting this deck, it's important to plan your turns and know what is left in your deck so you can make the most informed decision possible. On turn 6, we managed to play out the combo, and Deathstrike just goes to town, wiping the board, well, except for X23. But I guess all that extra energy doesn't matter for my opponent now, since it's the last turn. Now, not only did we wipe the board, but we also managed to finish with 132 and 268 power in our winning lanes, which is just absolutely insane. Not only is the deck insane, it's insanely fun to play. I'll pat myself on the back for that line. I feel like a Mr. Negative deck is the perfect shell for Lady Deathstrike. The more games that I played, I realized that we actually got to utilize her ability a lot more than I did in any of the Destroy variants that I tried, but also in games where we didn't play Lady Deathstrike, the negative shell is just good enough to win on its own. And I also like the various lines of play that the deck offers, and you can come up with some pretty creative lines of play. So overall, I would say if you're playing Lady Deathstrike, this is definitely the better deck to play her in. Now, of course, you could still play her in Destroy, but I think just the way her ability works right now, and given her current power level, I think she's much better in a Mr. Negative deck. Now, the final deck I was gonna take a look at, but I'm gonna save till the next video, is actually trying Lady Deathstrike in a Cerebro 3 deck. So I'm gonna give you guys a quick sneak preview of the deck. However, we're gonna save the rest of the gameplay for my Cerebro video. This is my cooked version of a Cerebro 3 deck with Lady Deathstrike in it. The idea is we want to play Cerebro, we want to follow it up with Mystique, and then we drop a Lady Deathstrike for 7 power. Basically about it. Turn 6, we're trying to follow it up with the Valkyrie and the Cerebro and the Mystique lane, but that's the deck. Now feel free to try it out for yourself. I would love to see what you think of this deck. And that's it for the Lady Deathstrike video. So overall, she's definitely not meta defining. However, she's actually a lot of fun to play, and I think that's probably the most important part about playing Marvel Snap. If you're having fun, then it's a good card. And I also think she falls into the same category as a card like Super Skrull fell into when Super Skrull was first released. Maybe Lady Deathstrike doesn't have that many uses right now. However, as more cards come out, she'll probably find a spot in other decks and maybe as a counter to certain other cards. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you are absolutely awesome, and I hope you have a great day.